Hello and welcome back to my channel. Wow, March was crazy. I feel like I say that every month. Maybe I should just accept that life in general is crazy and every month is going to be crazy, and that's just how we're going to do things. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm glad you're here. I forgot to make any food for you, so there's water and cold water in the fridge, and I hope you enjoy those beverages. Of course, please make sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to know when I make videos, because apparently that's what that button does. I also want to just let all of you know, if you haven't seen yet, that I have, because I don't have enough going on in my life, I have started a new channel as well, not on YouTube, but on Twitch. So at twitch.tv/EasyCat, which I'll put a link in the description and I'll show it here on the screen through the magic of technology. I am now playing video games and streaming on Twitch. So if you want to break from book content and want to see me play video games, because maybe that's a thing you want to do, you can head over there and follow, and that'd be great too. But also, if you don't want to do that, that's fine too. You know, you do you, right? You do you. I want to quickly mention that, you know, I have a lot of great books that I read this month, but I also read a lot of great manga, and I've really gone back and forth with this idea of, like, should they be in the same video, should they not be? I've decided that for now they're not going to be in the same video. So next week, I'm going to be making a video about all the manga that I read this past month, and so I will show that off as well. I would normally do that at the same time, like, release it within a couple days of each other. But there's a lot going on this week. We have the new Easy Cats Book Club book being announced tomorrow. There's just a lot going on, so we're gonna space them out. You know, we're gonna give it some breathing room. With all that said and done, let's jump in and look at everything that I read in March. I started off March really strong by reading The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I've been putting off this book for a while. I have no idea why, but I'm so glad I finally read it. Oh man, this was a good book. I really love that it starts off feeling just like a historical fiction story, and then like there's this really slow build to it having these fantastical elements. This book is really dark. I only recommend it if you are an adult and are reading adult books, because this book is really dark. It deals with some really intense subject matter, but man, it was good. Like, this book was so good. I already picked up the second book. I can't wait to read it. I just was like floored by this book. This book to me, it reminded me a lot of, things like The Name of the Wind and like just the storytelling structure. I'm really starting to realize that as far as fantasy stories go, I really like seeing a character start as a child and watching them like grow up. There's something really gratifying about that to me. I think because I watch a lot of anime and I watch a lot of TV shows. I love like animated TV shows and things like that, and I feel like the characters never change, right? Like, they always stay in the same they wear the same clothes every day. They always look the same. I'm really getting into fantasy where I'm like getting to watch these characters evolve, not only just like in their characterization, but like in their actual like years and age and life experience. This is really fun to me. I really loved the main character of this book. I thought she was just awesome. I think she puts a lot of female heroines in like young adult fantasy. Like, she could kick all their butts. Like, she was a really, really amazing character. I just really loved this book. I mean, like I said, really dark, really adult, but really, really great way to start off the month. So that was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Okay, so technically speaking, the next book I'm going to talk about, I've actually been reading since January, but I finished it in March, and I would just feel weird not mentioning it, because reading these books has become such a fun, interesting experience and part of my like social media story, I guess, if you want to call it that. So this month I finally finished The Fellowship of the Ring. Now, if you follow me on other channels, you know that I have been reading these books live every Sunday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to join, now you know the time. I started with The Hobbit back in December, and then I started this in January. And so I read twice a week. I read like a chapter, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less every single week. Reading it live has just been such a cool experience for a lot of reasons. So, you know, I haven't read these since I was in like elementary, like I want to say I was in like 7th grade when I last read these. So if you've ever read something in 7th grade and then picked it up as a full-grown adult, you might know that you won't remember anything that happened. In fact, most of my memories of this book aren't even from like reading it, they're from the movies, right? So reading these again, it's just so fun. I'm just discovering so many things I didn't even realize about the stories. I've just gotten completely swept up in the world of Tolkien. Why did I say it that way? It's just been so lovely. And getting to read it live with people and having them react to it and getting to like do the voices, and I don't know, when I read to myself, and I feel like a lot of us do this, we tend to speed read, right? Like, our mind reads it faster, and, you know, there are little things we miss. But when you read something out loud, you really enunciate every single word, and you really get just like the full impact of the sound of the language, which I think sometimes we miss when we're reading it to ourselves. it's so phenomenal. I've just had so much fun reading this. We're in Two Towers now, which we're reading, but like reading this story, I mean, there are moments, these are not spoilers if you've ever seen the movies or heard of. I feel like to say that I'm going to spoil Fellowship of the Ring is a little ridiculous, because at this point it's been out for a really long time. I think we can be okay with spoilers, right? So the moment when Frodo at the end of part 1, when Frodo decides that he is going to take, like, he's at a table full of all these like warriors with their weapons and the heads of their their different races and things like that. They're all sent to this table to have this council, and Frodo, like the littlest, least experienced of all of them, says, "I will do this thing. I will take this ring to Mordor." Reading that live, I like got choked up. I was sure that I was going to start crying, because it is such an incredibly powerful moment. And there are so many good moments in this book that just like really, really stand out. I mean, we all know the famous moment of Gandalf standing on the bridge and saying, "You shall not pass," right? But like even knowing that, even having seen that scene a billion times in, memes and in the movies and everything, it still has so much power and weight to it when you get to that moment of him, this little old man standing against this giant demon thing and saying, "Absolutely not, sir. Demon Karen, you are not coming in here today." It's just so powerful. So I've just been having a blast reading this. If you are one of the people who has been joining me for these live readings or watching the rewatches on Instagram TV, thank you so much. This has just been like such a fun experience, and I can't wait to get through Two Towers and into the Return of the King, and then to continue reading books live, because I really love it. It just brings me. It's as content creators, something I've come to realize is some days, sometimes you make content for you, and sometimes you make content for your audience, and the sweet spot is when you make content for both, right? Like content that just like fills your cup, fills your heart with joy, and fills your audience's cup and heart with joy. And to me, reading these live is really that sweet spot. Like, I feel like we're all in this together, and it's just really lovely. So, Fellowship of the Ring. I'm really excited to talk about this next book, because I did a review of this on TikTok, and unfortunately, it's just one of those, some books, 60 seconds is just not enough. And I really, really, really try, you guys know I do, to put, a concise, thoughtful review into 60 seconds. It is very challenging, but I try to do it. And with some books, it's super easy. With some books, it's very hard. There's one other book in this stack that it was very hard to do it, and it's coming up in a second. And I'll mention that as well. But The Octunnumi hold on, I always forget the name of the author, and it's not on the front of the book. So please bear with me as I... The Autonomy Fosbit Files Prologue by Trevor Allen Foris. So, if you've been on social media for a while, you've probably seen this book. The whole crux of this book is that it's gorgeous, right? And it's like shrouded in mystery. So, you can only order the book from the website. I think it's the Octunnumi.com. If you just search the Octunnumi, you'll find it. It's the only place to get it. They ship it to you. It's super back ordered, so it takes like 3 or 4 months to get it. And when you get it, it's just like beautifully packaged. You unwrap things. It comes with like a letter from one of the characters. It comes with like, there's a little dictionary that has like pronunciations as well as like character names and like words, and we'll get back to why that's important in a second. There's even an app you can download that does like some augmented reality stuff with the cover and certain pages in the book. And the thing about it is, like, it's this book that people have been unboxing, and look at how pretty it looks, and blah, 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 and it does look gorgeous. But the big thing is that it's, like, super mysterious. Like, nobody, for a long time, nobody knew what it was about. We just couldn't figure out what it was about. And a lot of people almost I feel like I've seen a lot of people feel weird about even talking about what it's about, because they feel like it's supposed to be mysterious. But books are art, and art is meant to be critiqued and reviewed, so we're going to talk about it, right? The Autonomy is essentially about these two brothers who are part of this association called the Autonomy, which deals with like these multiple layered realities, and they kind of keep things in check among those realities. So I really think this is comparable to something like Doctor Who. That is the first thing that came to mind. It is definitely like a high concept fantasy. One thing about this book that's really interesting is that it's almost like somebody on Goodreads said in a review that they felt like they were reading a book by someone from another planet. And that like perfectly sums it up, because even like the language, like there are lots and lots of words that are used in the book that you won't even know the meaning to. So you actually have to either use the pamphlet, or in the back of the book, there's this whole like dictionary of words and like what they mean and their definition. So, and the book does not give you context clues. You know how a lot of books will say like, And this was their bibbly-boo, and which was, and they'll tell you what a bibbly-boo was, right? But in this book, they don't do that. You are required to go look at the dictionary and figure it out. So this book is labeled as a prologue. It does have kind of a through story, but like an arc, but the arc doesn't really start, I would say, until maybe like a third or even halfway into the book is when it really starts to pick up. Really what you're doing is you're following these two brothers as they're kind of like bringing everybody together to like accomplish this task and like going to different realities and seeing these different worlds. And another thing that comes really early on, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling, is that the narrator, like the writer of the story, actually interacts with the characters. It's hard to explain, but it's kind of cool. I kind of loved it. More than anything, I think my key takeaway from the Octunnumi is that it's beautiful, and I think it is a really good story. And I think fans of things like Doctor Who, or I also would compare it to N.K. Jemisin, because N.K. Jemisin is really, to me, she's really like infamous for telling you a story and you read it and you're like, wow, this is really good, but you don't necessarily know what her books are about until like towards the very end. I love N.K. Jemisin, so I really vibed with that part of this book. But I think that people that are looking for more of like young adult or more straightforward stories, or don't like to like constantly be kind of like learning with the book, like they don't want to put in that extra work to like look up the definitions or figure out what this means, or like maybe go back a page to like understand what's happening, or really, I mean, this book really requires that you settle into this idea that you are going to be confused, right? Like you kind of have to settle into this space where there are going to be times where you don't know what's going on, and you're going to just kind of have to trust the book to fill in the blanks as you go, which I think it does a pretty good job of. Do I think there are lots of people that are going to buy this book because it's pretty and then read it and it's not going to be their cup of tea? 1000%, right? Absolutely. This book is not for everyone. I really truly believe that. It's just high concept, really quirky, really very weird. But to the people that do love it, they are going to love it. Like, this is for a specific type of reader, and they're going to love it. Like, I really enjoyed it. And I think, like I said, I like stuff that's really quirky and weird and kind of off the wall, off the cuff, strange. I'm willing to like be confused and like question things and go into this dictionary, and like I'm willing to have, this book is not like a book that you read. This is like a book that you experience. Like, it is an experience, from unboxing it to reading it to looking up words to looking up pronunciations. This is an experience. And for the people that are looking for that, they're going to love it. For the people that are looking for like a straightforward like fantasy story, they might be a little confused or let down by it. So that is what I would say. For me, it was a great read, and I hope that others who like this kind of book get to read it and really enjoy it. So, The Octunnumi. All right, next up is a book that I was really excited for. I actually got to listen to an early copy on audiobook thanks to Libro FM, but I loved it so much I went out and bought a copy anyway. So that is Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas. So this is a modern day retelling of Peter Pan. It is more of a young adult story. It has a lot more teen angst. The idea is that Wendy and her brothers went missing several years ago in the woods, and Wendy came back and her brothers didn't. And her mom and her have been like telling these stories about this mysterious guy named Peter Pan. And then one day he shows up, and then all of a sudden he's real, right? And then it kind of mixes like Peter Pan with this like crime thriller of like trying to figure out what happened to her brothers, and like other kids are going missing in the town. So it's got a really interesting premise. This is an interesting book to talk about for a few reasons. And, there's already been a lot of discussions about it. I think one of the biggest discussions that is being had about this book is that, so this is from the author of Cemetery Boys, right? Cemetery Boys is this, talk about a debut, right? Cemetery Boys is this incredible debut book that deals with like trans representation, Latin representation. Just, it's such a cool book, and it has so much representation. And I really feel, I talked to so many people that read that book, and they were like, and who were trans, and were like, this is the first time I've actually read a main character that I related to, and from a trans standpoint, and that's just so cool. So then we come to Lost in the Neverwoods. So before we even talk about this, let's talk about the story first. So I think the story is really great. I thought it was a really fun read. The one thing that, we'll talk, I'm telling you, this is a hard book to talk about. This book gets really dark towards the end, and I think for some people that's going to be a little shocking and a little jarring, and it's going to throw them a little bit. I've even had a couple people reach out to me personally after I did my review, because I gave it a really favorable review. I really liked the book. But parents reached out to me and said, I felt like the ending was just too dark for me, and it just went in a direction I didn't like. And I think that may, if a couple people are reaching out, it's probably a lot of people are going to feel that way about this book. So I'll throw that out there. The book does get pretty dark. The other thing that's hard about fairy tale retellings, right, and this has always been a concern for me about fairy tale retellings, is when you retell a fairy tale, you're going to be compared to other books that are retellings of that fairy tale. So what I will say is, while I really liked Lost in the Neverwoods, I don't think it ever quite hits the heights of Peter and the Starcatchers, which is probably my favorite Peter Pan retelling, right? So there's all of that. The other issue with this book is that, I hate calling it an issue because it's not an issue, and we're going to talk about why. There is almost no diversity or representation or anything like that in this book. So it's hard for Aiden Thomas, it's a weird place to be in, because he went from being this debut author that like made people feel so seen, to now writing this book that has like zero representation. But, we also have to acknowledge that as an author, Aiden Thomas is still a queer author, and so being that way, that is still representation, right? Like this is still kind of considered a queer book, even though it doesn't have any queer characters. It's such an interesting place to be. I almost wish it was the other way around. I wish this had been Aiden Thomas's debut, and then Cemetery Boys had come out, because it feels odd to have such a breakout debut. And you know what the thing is? I am almost 1000% sure that all of this had to do with the publisher and how they decided to release things. And I think it's very possible that Lost in the Neverwoods could have been written first. I don't know, but it's an interesting thing, right? And the other interesting conversation that I think about is, and I'm not saying one way or the other, right? But as a queer person, right, especially on TikTok and Instagram, we're always talking about holding straight white authors accountable for adding more diversity to their books, right? So then you get into this weird space of like, well, if a queer non-white writer writes something with an all-white straight cast, do they also need to be held accountable for that? And I don't have an answer. I don't know. It's just interesting questions that this book raised for me, because of all the things having to do with the author, right? So with all of that being said, I do want to end on this note about this book, that I really liked this book. I really liked the characters in this book. I really liked the young adult aspect of this book. I really liked how the retelling of Peter Pan was handled. Aiden Thomas is still an instant buy author for me. I can't wait to see what comes out next. But I think there's a lot to break down about this book, from that aspect. Not even to break down. It's just a lot of interesting things to think about, right? And it's not, and I hope you don't go away from this thinking that I'm like calling Aiden Thomas out, because that's absolutely not the case. I think so many things happen from like a publishing standpoint and everything like that. And I truly believe that queer authors should be allowed to write whatever they want. So if they want to write an all straight cast, they should absolutely be allowed to do that, right? And we should not, queer authors do not owe us their queerness or their representation. But this is inevitably a conversation that is going to be had because of the nature of not necessarily Aiden Thomas as a person, but just because of what Cemetery Boys, the book, was and is for so many people. I think that is more the thing that's going to cause this to be a conversation than anything. So I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Like, I've thought about this a lot with this book, and I hope I'm not making a mistake addressing it in this video, because these things are so hard to talk about, and I always want to be really respectful and come at these conversations with a mind of curiosity and openness and thoughtfulness. So let me know if you have any thoughts about this. I'm so curious to hear what you guys have to think. So that is Lost in the Neverwoods. Overall, after all of that is said and done, I really enjoy this book, and I hope you do too. Okay, next up is a book that I was not sure I was going to like, and that is Bedazzled by Ryan LaSala. So essentially, Bedazzled is a young adult contemporary queer story about a young man who, we kind of flash back and forth with time. This young man really loves cosplaying, and he loves creating costumes for characters and going to conventions and showing them off. And he ends up dating this guy who is not out of the closet, and we sort of see their relationship both from the end game where they've already broken up, and then also how their relationship grows. So we kind of flash back and forth through time. Ryan LaSala also wrote another book called Reverie, which was a young adult fantasy story. And I was not a huge fan of that book. I just didn't really care for it. And so when he released this book, I was really unsure about it. I almost didn't pick it up because I was like, well, I didn't really love Reverie. Am I going to love Bedazzled? I don't know. But I decided to give it a chance, right? And I'm so glad I did, because oh my God, I loved this book so much. This book is just filled with nerdiness and fun, and it's like the kind of book you just read with like a giant goofy smile on your face. It's so fun. It's such a fun, enjoyable read. It's so cute. If you are a gay nerd, you are going to love this book. It's just a delight. It's delight to read. I really have nothing bad to say about it. I mean, it's funny that I went from a book that I had so many critiques about with Ryan LaSalle's first book to this book, which I just loved it so much. And there's so many things, right? I just feel like this is such an improvement from Reverie. With Reverie, I had a hard time connecting with any of the characters. I felt like they were all kind of like archetypes of characters. These characters were just so lovely. I immediately fell in love with them. They were so delightful. I wanted to spend more time with them. I would take a sequel to Bedazzled because I wanted to spend more time with these just wonderful characters. I think it dealt with a lot of really great things. I think especially the main character has this like really ridiculous, crazy mother who's like famous in the art world. And it's just something I've never seen before. Like, I feel like a lot of YA books have like slightly stable parents. She was like off the wall. Like, she was like Karen from Will and Grace. That's something I said in my TikTok review and I stand by it. But as a mother, I mean, it was ridiculous. And it's like I said, it's the book definitely has drama, but so much of the book is just fun and wild and crazy and fun, and it's just fun. So if you're looking for like a light, fun read, and you kind of like that nerdy, geeky cosplay convention side, definitely check out Bedazzled. I was not disappointed at all. This was a great book. There are two books that I would say were my favorites of March, and this next book is one of them. It is also the other book that I feel like was hard to talk about in 60 seconds, and that is Yoke by Mary H.K. Choi. Yoke is a story that is about a young woman whose life is a wreck. Like, she is a mess. She lives in a really, like, beat-down apartment. She's, like, living with her roommate that she's, like, kind of dating. He's like, terrible to her. She, like, is estranged from her family. She doesn't even talk to her sister, and they live in the same city. They live in New York. And then she finds out that her sister has cancer. And so now she has to kind of be the person that her sister is going to lean on. And they have for so long not leaned on each other that they kind of have to like refigure out how to be sisters. The characters are also Korean American. So there's like a lot of representation. There's a lot of talking about, especially when they deal with their parents, just dealing with the culture and the culture shift. You know, these two girls are like living in like New York City, but their parents who live in Texas are still, you know, very traditional and things like that. And like kind of their relationship with their mother. They talk about things that aren't even like necessarily like, I think anybody can relate to, right? Where you have a hard time communicating with your family members. There's so much of that in this book. But man, this book is phenomenal. I would classify this more as new adult. I know it's been like being released as young adult, and I've seen it as like a young adult pick at Barnes & Noble for Book of the Month. I would definitely air this more towards new adult, which means that the characters are in their early 20s. There is heavier subject matter. There are adult relationships. There is adult substance use. Like, there's a lot of things like that in this book. So I have a hard time recommending it for like young adults. But wow, this book blew my socks off. The writing is beautiful. The characters are so incredibly realistic and flawed and human and relatable and just phenomenal. There's so much about this book that you will find relatable no matter who you are. The writing is astounding. The writing is just freaking gorgeous, beautiful, out of this world good. I highly, highly, highly recommend Yoke. I would only advise that you maybe do some research because there is a lot of, it does deal with some really heavy subject matter, from cancer to eating disorders to things like that. So it is a heavier book from the tone and from the subject matter, but man, it is so phenomenally written. It's one of my favorite, but it's easily going to be on my top 10 list of 2021. There's no doubt about it. I just absolutely adored this book. So I hope you get a chance to read Yoke. Also, I just want to mention this cover that literally has like a hand reaching. Stunning. All right, next up is a book that I actually got sent by the publisher, and I did a promotional piece for on TikTok, and that is Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Boulley. So despite this cover, this book is not a fantasy book. This is actually a crime thriller that deals with a young woman who is living with the Ojibwe people in Michigan, I think it is. And she essentially sees a murder happen, and then the FBI pulls her in to have her go undercover. There's like a lot of drug trafficking that's happening and a lot of illegal drug selling and things like that are happening in her community. And they're going to have her help them figure out what is happening. And so it deals a lot with, especially like the Ojibwe people. It deals a lot with identity. It deals a lot with, protecting your your family and your community, and how do you do that without destroying your family and community, and like loyalty and things like that. And I think it's really cool for that. And I feel like, if not, especially from the whole perspective of Native American side, I feel like I have not read enough books by and about Native Americans. So because of that, I feel like I learned a lot from this book. And I feel like it was just, right, that was my favorite part of it, is all of the customs and, a lot of the discussion about beliefs and things like that. That was absolutely my favorite part of this book, because it was just so different than anything else I've read before. I loved it. There's some things about the story that I thought were a little weird. So I feel like Donis, the main character, she never really reacted as much to things as I felt like she should react to. Like, I feel like she got over deaths that were happening and bad things that were happening around her really, really quickly. And maybe that was just the nature of her character. If I saw a murder, I would not deal with that very well. And I would be a hot mess. I would not be helping the FBI like a couple weeks later, because I would be a disaster. The other thing is, like, her partnering up with the FBI, the whole time it does seem a little far-fetched. Like, I understand why and how that happened, and I'm sure it probably does happen. And the author did make a note that, yes, it is legal, like, everything that they were doing. The FBI also, like, the two members of the FBI that we meet seemed, like, very unprofessional. There was just some weirdness there, okay? The other maybe like little complaint I have is I think the book was a little too long. I think the book could have definitely been, like, we could have shaved off 50 pages or so and still had the same experience. There are points where the book feels really drawn out. But overall, I thought it was really good. I think, like I said, it just was so different. I don't read a lot of crime thrillers. I can't even tell you the last time I read something by and about Native Americans. I really appreciated all of that. And like I said, when the book was at its best, when the book was really glowed and shined for me, is when they were talking about, Native American stories and culture and history and beliefs, and, why those things are at combat with, the world as it is today. And, that difference between, like, what their ancestors and the people that are older than them in their community think, as opposed to how these kids are thinking. And I really liked all of that. I think regardless of what the ethnicity is, I think it's always very interesting to see younger characters, dealing with the beliefs and cultures of the people that are older than them in their community. I think that's always very interesting to me. And I think it was especially interesting to me in this book, because this was such a new, different form of diversity for me. So overall, I really like The Firekeepers Daughter. Little complaints here and there, but I really, really enjoy this book. And I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy this book. It's just a very, like, interesting read with a lot of really interesting ideas. And I weirdly, like, kept thinking about Breaking Bad. Like, it kind of has, like, a young adult Breaking Bad vibe to it. And I say that as a good thing. Like, I liked that aspect of it, that we're kind of exploring, like, they talk a lot about how, like, drugs and things being brought in from Canada, because they're right on the border, and, like, dealing with that relationship between the state and the country above. There's just so many interesting things in this book that I walked away feeling like I knew more about things. And I liked that. So that is Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Boulley. All right, I feel like this video is getting really long, so I'm going to try and get through these next couple really fast. So the next one is Amari and the Night Brothers, which was by B.B. Alston. This is a middle grade story that I absolutely adored. So the idea here is Amari's brother has gone missing. She is living a normal life, and it turns out that her brother was part of this Bureau for Supernatural Affairs. She gets invited to go to, like, a summer camp where she can basically, like, audition to be part of the Bureau. It kind of takes, like, aspects from Percy Jackson as well as Harry Potter, and kind of combines them into something, but with, like, a lot more diversity and representation. It's just really fun. Like, we'll talk about this more in just a second when we talk about the last book I read this month. Middle grade books are hard for me. They always just feel a little too childish for me. Not to say anything bad about adults or teenagers who read middle grade. I think it's awesome. Just for me personally, I a lot of times have a hard time getting into them, because I can feel that they're written more for kids. That being said, Amari transcends all of that. So for me to absolutely adore a middle grade book it's something special. Like, I loved this book. I loved this book more than because I just read Percy Jackson for the first time this past year. I loved it way more than that. I know for some people that's going to be sacrilege, but I'm going to say it anyway. I just thought it was so fun. And I can't wait for book 2. I thought it was really good. The main character is fantastic. I just thought she was so interesting. She was such a fun character to follow. The world is super interesting. Like I said, if you like things like Percy Jackson or Harry Potter, You're going to love the world. It's like very fully realized. It has a lot of magic. There's a lot of really great twists. There are two kind of big twists. One I definitely guessed. The other I definitely did not. So I really appreciate that because sometimes I feel like middle grade books are way too predictable. I like that this had some unpredictability to it. And it just was really fun. I can't wait for the next one. And I hope you check out Amari and the Night Brothers. All right, next up is a really cool book. This is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I think this is I don't think this is a new book. I think this is a slightly older book. But in any case, this is a story. It's like a dark academia story about these teenagers who are going to this school for like they live and breathe Shakespeare. Like it's their class is specifically focused on Shakespeare. And we are in the future and when we start and we see that some crime has been committed and the main character has been like falsely accused. So then we flash back and we get to see like what happened and how it happened. But this book is just like really like haunting and really interestingly written, and like Shakespeare is weaved into everything, and it definitely has that like really like dark academia feel to it. The characters are super interesting. The way that they talk, the way that, you know, the book talks about acting and just being an actor and all of that stuff in general, super interesting. Definitely a book for adults. But I really, I might take that back. I think young adults could enjoy this too, but like older young adults, like 15, 16 up. But I really liked this book a lot. This was recommended to me. Funnily enough, this was recommended to me by a TikToker named Kevin. And coming up, the next book is actually a book written by him. So he had a very lot of influence on my reading this month. But I really, really enjoyed If We Were Villains. If you're looking for dark academia, if you're looking for something a little creepy, a little spooky, not like Ghostwise, but like creepy and spooky just in like psychological, like the way that people think and feel and treat each other. Check out If We Were Villains. Also, if you like Shakespeare, because it's just loaded with Shakespeare. I really liked this book. It's just a really cool read. It was super different than anything I've read recently, so I really enjoyed it. Okay, so Kevin Tyler Norman wrote this lovely book of poems called Shelter, and he actually sent this to me. We're friends on TikTok. We did a book exchange, so I sent him one of my books. He sent me one of his books. And I hadn't picked this up for a while, so I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I was looking to add a couple more books because I hadn't read as much as I wanted to in March. So I was like, I'm going to read some shorter things that I have to try and like up my amount of books that I read in March. So I was like, well, poetry books are quick reads, right? So I picked up Shelter and I was like, I'm going to make this one of my March reads. I can read it in a day. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So this is, I'm assuming, an autobiographical story dealing with Kevin or whoever if it's not autobiographical, we'll say the main character. The poems are shaped in such a way that we get to see him basically in love with this man who it's like a long distance relationship, and then we see it fall apart, and then we see, you know, how he deals with this, and you know, he's so in love with this person that when things go bad, it just like wrecks him from the inside out, and we see that all through poetry. Oh my God, I said there were two books that were my favorites this month. So one was Yoke, and this was the second one. This blew me away. If you like poetry, if you want to read about love and loss, Shelter is out of this world. I mean, it is so gorgeous. And it's painful, but it's beautiful, and it's heartbreaking, but it's hopeful. I said in my TikTok review, and I really stand by this, the words are so raw and real and personal that I felt like I was intruding, right? Like I felt like I shouldn't be reading this. Like it felt like reading someone's diary, right? I was like, oh my God, I shouldn't be reading that. Like I felt almost like I shouldn't, like it made me feel uncomfortable to be reading that. And I say that as a compliment because that really shows that I felt like every ounce of Kevin was on the page explaining these feelings. I read this in a day and I wept through the entire book. Like somewhere on page 9 or 10, I started crying, and then I ugly cried my way through the entire thing. I read it all in one sitting. It's gorgeous. I mean, listen, I know people like tab and whatever, but I did dog ear some pages just because the poems on them were just so gorgeous. I wanted to be able to flip back and look at them again. This is really good. Definitely adult. Definitely, I would recommend this for adults because it does deal with some pretty like heavy topics, and it also deals with like an adult relationship, and I think that's important to note. But man, this book, Kevin, thank you so much for sending this to me because this was absolutely phenomenal, and I'm so. I also said this in my TikTok review, and I stand by this as well. I feel this is the kind of book that I feel honored to have been given. Like I feel lucky to have been given the chance to read. Like my life would have not, the whole time that I've lived on this earth would be less good if I had not gotten a chance to read this book. That's how much I loved it. So thank you so much for this. It was lovely. And last but not least, I just today finished my last book of March, which is Wings of Fire by T. Sutherland. I might be saying the first name wrong. I'm sorry. So this series has come very highly recommended to me. I went in with a lot of hesitation because, again, I'm not a huge middle grade fan. This book, basically, this is a story about dragons doing dragon things, and kind of like it's about a prophecy and these like 5 dragons that are part of the prophecy. I think this is a great book. I think it's a great middle grade book. Am I necessarily going to continue reading the series? I don't know. It definitely falls into those middle grade tropes that I sometimes have a hard time with. I kind of feel like I'm watching like a Saturday morning cartoon, and I don't know. I can feel that it's written more for like younger people, right? And some of the humor is like the kind of humor you would see on like a Saturday morning cartoon, and not that that's a bad thing, right? Like, I really want to acknowledge that I think this book was really good. It's just that I personally sometimes have a harder time with middle grade books just because they aren't always my cup of tea. What I may try doing is I've heard that the graphic novels are follow the story exactly, so I may check out the graphic novels because I think I'm willing to go on this journey a little bit more if I can like kind of speed read through like a graphic novel and see like the artist, like the art of it, and see it more as like almost like a movie kind of thing. I don't know. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to continue reading the books yet, but overall, I think this was a great book. I think if you're looking for a good middle grade story that is action-packed, full of... I also want to note that I think this book really deals well with like breaking down this like ideas about stereotypes and racial discrimination and things like that. But because they're all dragons, it comes in a very like easy to swallow, understandable way. It kind of disguises like dealing with stereotyping and racial discrimination and, you know, these unconscious biases that we create as human beings. I think it deals with that, but in like a very like, it disguises it with dragons. So I think that would also be something I would mention about this book that I really liked. That I know it's a weird description, but if you're the kind of person that makes sense for, you'll know what I'm saying, right? But yeah, so Wings of Fire was really good. I don't know if I'll continue with the series yet, but I think if you are looking for a good middle grade book, Wings of Fire is great for that. Whew, that is everything I read in March. I feel like I didn't read as much this month as I normally do as far as books, because I read a lot of manga and I had a lot of other things going on. But I do think that I read a lot of really interesting to discuss books and a lot of books that had a lot of depth to them and a lot of things to talk about. And I really liked that. Like I read a lot of more challenging books. Like several of the books I read this month really left me thinking more than sometimes books do. Like, you know, a lot of times I'll finish a book and be like, oh, I love that. That was great, right? Or, oh, I didn't like that. But this month, all the books I read, or most of the books I read this month really left me with like a lot of thoughts to process. And I think that's awesome. So as always, make sure to like and subscribe if you want to come back here and see more of this. I'm posting this on March 31st. Tomorrow I'll be posting a video with the April Easy Cats book club pick. So I hope you join me for that. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a wonderful day. And as always, happy reading.